Hello, hello. This is Tamara Hergert, and I have such a great joy to have Leigh Witherell with me again today. She came to our podcast in end of April last year, 2025, and we just had such a blast during our conversation. And her journey is so amazing because you started about 3, 4 years ago, right?
About 4 years ago, yeah.
Yeah. And from that point, your art career, it went into stratosphere, I think. And it's like every year it just keeps going up and up and up. And it's you don't have any kind of like benefactors that like you don't have somebody like pulling you from the top, like, dragging you up into like auctions or like galleries. You don't have any like pre-existing connections, right?
No, not at all.
And that is so valuable from the standpoint that you're basically switch careers. You started doing full-time art 4 years ago, and now you are somewhere where it takes some people like 20 years to get to this point. And I think it's due to just amazing clarity on what you want to create, being very authentic with your art, and just having excellent art skills. That helps. And you're being very diligent with and purposeful with your career. You're just going through all of the steps that you need to take, and you take them because you feel like this is what I need to do, even though you're like, you're just like everybody else, every other artist that, or most of us. We just like a very private people. We just kind of want to just create art and kind of stay in our world and not get out there as much. And it would be great if somebody else did it all for us,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
it's
we
just
would.
not the case. And it wouldn't be truly authentic to us. Like that representation would not be fully aligned with us. And so I'm gonna just do a quick call out to other artists about your website. I think they should go and check it out. It's Lee's, Lee's.art.com.
Except there's no .com after it. It's just lees.art. So no .com.
Lee's.art. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I was like looking at the website address. I'm like, this is a weird address. Okay, so Lee's dot art. So no dot com. And then the Instagram handle is Lee's Art FL. Okay. So it is classic nudes. So it is very balanced in like, to me, it is very visually appealing, but full disclosure, there's going to be some boob action there. So just be aware of that. And so Lee, I'm going to hand you the microphone. I'm just so thrilled to have you. And tell me all about what you have been able to achieve in this recent past months.
Well, it's been exciting. We moved from Florida to Pennsylvania. So for pretty much from April of last year until just a couple of months ago, I really was kind of didn't have a real working studio. So because we had to dismantle my studio. So I was kind of working as I could. But the move was really good. And actually it's been good for my art to move actually out of Florida because there's so many beautiful, talented artists in Florida, but that Florida's art is pretty specific. It
Hmm.
falls into the pop art range or more like landscapes,
Yeah.
beach scenes, things like that. And that is beautiful art, but it's not what I do. So I had
Yeah.
a very limited amount of following. Although I do apply to the nude night art shows that
Hmm.
come about in Florida. And there's two, one in Orlando and one in St. Petersburg that are coming up that I've applied to. I don't know. You never know if you're going to get in or not. I mean, it depends on the jurors, right? But other than that, it's been a really busy year. There's been a lot of press. There's been quite a lot of shows and
Hmm.
exhibitions and things like that. And it's gone to the point now where I tell my husband, I'm like, "Hey, I got printed again, another interview," and now he goes, "Okay." I mean, it's at that point now where
Yes.
I'm like,
Like, yeah,
"All right,
not a big deal.
yeah, that's another one," and I'm like, "Well, I'm still excited about it."
Yes, exactly. Right.
But they do good though, they really do. I
Yeah.
really do encourage artists to take advantage, even if you have to at first you kinda have to pay a little bit to do it, and they're never
Yeah.
very expensive,
Yeah.
but it really is good reach, and it's good
Yeah.
exposure, and,
Yes.
there's a lot of magazines now, especially the ones that are overseas, They're really taking their time and interviewing the artist and really coming up with some excellent questions. I have a new
Mhm.
interview coming out in Bold Journey, which is a United States
Uh-huh.
magazine, and it's coming out here soon. And just it took me a few days to answer their questions because they were
Yeah.
very in depth questions. And I'm
Uh-huh.
like, oh, I'm gonna have to think about that for a little bit. So it took a few days to actually answer those. It wasn't something I could just pop off the top of my head. But I like that format that they do, where they send you the questions in advance and they're like, here, think about this. And that's a really good thing. So and then the shows are pretty exciting, the ones that are coming up. I've
Mhm.
seen a lot of different ones now that we're on the Northeast coast. So it's nice. It's very nice.
It's amazing. So you were in like over 30 shows as of April last year. And I looked at your website again today. And so you probably added like 10 more
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
just 1 year.
Yeah.
And so are you having a solo show in Venice this year?
I'm hoping to, yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
it's one of those things where, you're still planning it. Of course, anything and everything can still go wrong. That's just the nature of the game.
Yeah.
But you're still planning it, and, a gallery called Musa Gallery, which is a woman-led gallery out of Italy. They actually contacted me last year to be in their Women Essence Awards
Uh-huh.
show, so I was able to get awarded that one, which is really nice. I think they chose, like, 60 female artists internationally to be in the show, and that was really nice. But they contacted me again, and they asked if I wanted to take a space in the Venice Biennale in July, and I accepted. I'm like, "Yeah," so I reserved my space. Now
Yes.
it's the matter of, like, the funding part of it because
Yes.
they don't absorb all of the costs, but the
Uh-huh.
costs that they pass on to the artist are really small. But I
It's
mean,
amazing.
it's
Yeah.
not something that you just go, "Oh, look, I've got that change in my grocery bill." It's not that, but it is really it's not bad. And yeah, I'm excited. So this solo show would be introducing um one completed series that I actually just completed in 2025.
Yeah.
And the series is called Tell Me How, and it's got three dots after the how because
Mhm.
I want observers to finish the sentence when they look at the piece. So whatever they're feeling from that piece they're looking at, I want them to finish that sentence of "Tell me
Yeah.
how" to
Yeah.
whatever, fill in the blank. And then I do have another series that I'm starting, tentatively titled, "God Needs the Devil," and it's an exploration of the Jezebel, image that women can get
Yeah.
when we have any kind of sexuality involved at all.
Yes.
I don't know about the title yet. I'm still thinking about it, but
Every time I look at any of your paintings,
excuse me.
I'm like, what is she thinking about?
Ah,
And I'm sure I'm like superimposing my own feelings and experiences onto her, but it just like, it makes me question, like, what is she thinking about? Like,
yeah, yeah,
why is she sitting like this? And why is he like that next to her? And like, what is he thinking about? I never like just like scroll through your art. I always, okay, I don't know, like what is going on there right now. Like, and it's not like your art is like very intimate. Like it has that tension and profoundness in that moment that you're capturing. So there's no real physical action that's happening. Like, there's no movement that is going on in the scene, but like what is going on inside of them is like so well captured. And I think it's just so wide open to interpretation
yeah,
in terms of like what do
yeah.
you think she's feeling right now?
That's on purpose. So I'm glad that you said that. Thank you for the compliments, by the way. That's really what I'm going for. I get a lot of people say that they don't just scroll past it. They have to actually look at it and see
Yeah.
what they think. And I don't as an artist, I know what I'm thinking when I paint it, but I never want to impose that thought process on
Hmm.
the observer because you're going to bring your own life experiences into those scenes.
Exactly.
And I
Yeah.
really want to capture those intimate scenes that nobody sees. These scenes are
Yes.
all behind the doors. They're behind closed curtains. Nobody sees these things. But
Yes.
all of these images are inspired by actual bits and pieces of real life that I
Hmm.
observe. Because
Yeah.
I come from a family of storytellers. I mean, all of my relatives, you should see the family reunions. It's ridiculous. The stories that they tell, it's awful. But one thing that taught me was that taught me how to listen to what's
Yeah.
not being said. Like, there's one image 6 in the series of Tell Me How is, a younger woman who's nude, and she's sitting on a bed next to an older gentleman who is just listening to what she's saying. There's
Yeah.
something going on there. That was actually inspired by an overheard conversation at a restaurant when I was in Texas visiting family. I overheard this conversation between a young woman and her older companion, and she was literally telling him that she felt very not special when compared to his late wife, who apparently had
Yeah.
been a very successful person. But
Yeah.
what caught my attention was what he wasn't doing. He wasn't
Mhm.
correcting her, he wasn't interrupting her, he was just really empathetically listening to all of her,
Mhm.
and that's what inspired that piece. Now, was she nude
Yeah.
in the restaurant? No, of course not. Of course she wasn't. But for me, there's nothing more vulnerable in life than when you
Yeah.
shed your clothes, because
Yeah.
then all your armor is gone and you are
Yeah.
vulnerable to the judgments of the universe, everybody. So that's why my figures are nude for the most part, is because I want to strip that armor away so that
Yeah.
the vulnerability shows through. And it's an interesting thing. I very rarely get to hear what people are saying about it, like, in person, but at the
Mhm.
New York show that I was just at, which was actually produced, Agora Gallery hosted the show
Mhm.
in New York City. Really great gallery, beautiful gallery.
Yeah.
And they hosted it for the My What If Foundation, which is an organization that helps people process, post-traumatic stress disorder
Mhm.
and grief and trauma. And it was a really great exhibition, very well put on. The catering was amazing. Couldn't believe the food they had there. It was actually really, really great.
Wow.
But this woman, this older woman, and she was older than me by quite a bit. She came up to me and she asked if that was my piece, the piece that I just happened to be standing in front of mine. And I was like, yes, that's mine. And she said, she says, "I just cannot believe it." She says, "You do such great boobs." And she just said it, just bam. And I'm just like, "Okay, all right, yeah, we'll talk about that. Sure, we'll talk about that." She must have spent 10 minutes talking to me about boobs and how nobody wants to see the nipple. I mean, and then she had
Yes.
70 or 80 years old, and I'm just, like,
Yes.
standing there just stunned at this conversation. But it was such a great
Yeah.
"You do such great boobs." It was just this all I was like, "Okay, sure, all right, we'll go with that." And it was so funny. Those are the moments that I live for. I love
Mhm.
hearing, what people are really thinking, even
Yeah.
if somebody doesn't like it. I wanna hear that too, because that all goes towards our experiences as human beings. So
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
interesting.
So, we started talking about this before we started the recording, but I want to go back to the shipping. So, as artists, we have our own like costs and overhead. So basically, it's a cost of doing business. So previously, in previous years, like all the art books that or art business books that I've read, the convention was to split the cost 50-50 between the gallery and the artist. Or like if you can just bring it to the gallery and just drop it off there, that's ideal. And that's why most artists kind of just show their art locally, not like not like in other states or internationally. But now the trend seems to be shifting towards the galleries just not being able to share that cost with the artists. It's not like they're being mean, they're not, but for them to survive and exist as businesses and grow as businesses, they just cannot have that cost overhead anymore. And so, is that what you have observed? What you
Yeah.
have experienced?
Actually, I have, and it does make total sense because, I mean, as all of us can attest to, the cost of living has just risen exponentially. And for businesses, that cost is even more. Their overhead costs have risen, and in the art world, I think it's still recovering from the downturn that happened. Post COVID, they had those
Yeah,
years where it was just a big downturn.
yeah,
And I think they are still recovering, and you are still sadly enough, you read almost every day about galleries closing and
yes,
galleries that have been in business for decades, going out.
hmm,
And I think that's just inevitable that they have to pass that cost along. So, yeah, I can understand why artists would want to stay local, but
yeah,
sometimes, like, especially where my art is concerned, it's such a specific kind of niche. Staying local isn't always an option, and you have to be
exactly.
willing to take on some of those costs. And so it makes me, I don't apply to every show that comes across my email.
Hmm.
Because sometimes they don't, they're not a fit. It's not going to be something
Uh-huh.
that's going to do me any good. The only show that I actually keep as like this is more personal. I'm just very attached to it. There's a little, art club organization in Granbury, Texas, and I love them. They're the Lake Granbury Art Association, and I love them. They're on Instagram. Do I ever anticipate selling anything at those art shows? I don't. But Granbury, Texas is a central location to where my family can actually go and see something in person because
Yeah.
my family is all in Texas. And so I have family and cousins and aunts and uncles. They can go see
Uh-huh.
these things in person. And
Yeah.
I love this gallery. It's in an old, I think it's like in an old courthouse or something. I mean, it's just very Texas and I love it.
Mhm.
But, I don't send nudes to there because they don't show nudes, and that is still
Yeah.
something that I run up against, which is why just staying local is easier for me now, where I live
Mhm.
now, than it was in Florida, because the Northeast up here, they don't seem to care at all that you've got boobies showing on a canvas. They don't care. They're like, "Bring it on. Bring it. We're gonna." But, Florida,
Yeah.
we're much more conservative in that
Yes.
respect.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So, but no, the shipping costs are definitely it's a
Mhm.
barrier, especially
Yeah.
when you're with overseas shipping, because
Yeah.
that not only do you have that cost, you also have tariffs now, and you also
Exactly.
have all of the customs paperwork and all of
Uh-huh.
those things. I actually used a service
Yeah.
when I did
What's
my
your service
show.
again? I
Um,
remember you telling
yeah,
us.
I use pirateship.com locally,
Yeah.
but the overseas service that I used took gosh, I forget the name of it. Oh, it was,
Thank you.
no, CARNET, that was it. That's the process, it's called the Carnet process, and what they did was they took care of all of the paperwork for customs, so nothing was gonna get hung up, and I think the cost at the time that I used it, I think it cost me like $400 to use it, but it saved us time and effort
Mhm.
and just
Mhm.
the paperwork is just amazing.
Yeah.
Boomerang carnets, that's what it's called, boomerang carnets. So if you are gonna ship overseas, especially if you have, like, a whole show to ship, like, if I'm
Yeah.
going to Venice in September or in July, I will
Yeah.
obviously be using the boomerang carnet service again.
Mhm.
It's just saves you so much hassle and so much
Yeah.
to do. But yeah, I think I would be very surprised. I think the artists that are like superstar status, like your Tracy Emmons and some of
Yeah.
those other like the artists who are always in the top 50 on
Mhm.
artfacts.com, they probably don't have to pay for shipping, I'm gonna assume. I
Yeah.
would be very surprised if they did, but they might. I don't know. But I think
I
for those
think
of
they
us who
might.
yeah,
They might.
they might, yeah.
Even yes, even if you're a superstar, I think it just the galleries are just in this new kind of existence right now,
They are.
and that's like their economic reality. You cannot really do anything about it. 3 cats now too because my kids just like worked on me for 2.5 days and like, please, can we get the kid?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so you have mentioned the website artfacts.com,
Yeah.
right? And it basically has a rating of artists based on how many shows they have done and just their overall status in the art world, right? Kind of like standing. It's like updated pretty much live based on their actions, right? Like
Yeah.
what they post on their website, what shows they have done recently, and there are also ratings for galleries as well, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that is very helpful to just even like if you're considering a show in an art gallery, go to artfacts.com
Yeah.
and just check that gallery out and see like what that website is showing
Yeah.
about
It
that
is
gallery.
actually interesting because they have these graphs that you can look at, and
Hmm.
they'll tell you the percentage of, who people show with, who do they show most often. You can even find the curators of the shows on Artfacts, which is really interesting to see
Yeah.
what they do. But I bought a membership to Artfacts because I wanted all of the nitty-gritty to it. And that actually gets me to be ranked as well. So every time I'm in a show or anything like that, I put
Uh-huh.
it immediately on Artfacts because it goes
Yeah.
towards that. But it is interesting
Yeah.
to because even with me, like I said, I don't get to go to the shows very often,
Hmm.
but, I get to see what artist I'm showing with most often, which is actually
Hmm.
really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And I know that people look at the artifacts because you can also see when people are looking at your profile, it'll tell you how many and they're looking. The
Yeah.
galleries, the curators, they're looking, and I'm trying to figure out how to do the representation thing right now. I would love to get with an art agency. Make my life so much easier to be with let
Yes.
somebody else do all that stuff.
Yes, exactly.
And you can find them too as well on art as well
Hmm.
as on artifacts. So yeah.
Yeah. So, how much is the membership there?
I think for mine, I did like the basic, which was perfectly fine and it's more than what I need. And I think I do a yearly one and I don't even think it was $100 for a year. I
Hmm.
think it was like maybe 50 or 70 or something like that for a year. And
I
it's
think it.
really nice to be rated on there because then people can actually see and it's a very trusted site and
Hmm.
people can actually see it and you can put all of your shows, it'll categorize it in art fairs, exhibitions.
Hmm.
The only thing they don't do yet is they don't count virtual exhibitions, which
Hmm.
I think they're probably going to end up having to rethink that because
Yeah.
there's so many of those now, uh,
Yes.
but they don't count those. They don't let you count it.
Hmm.
So that was interesting, I thought.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I think their thought process is that there are a lot of online websites
Mhm.
or platforms. Basically, you just create your artist profile, and basically you have your page. And does that count as an exhibition?
Yeah, that is a good question. That's a
You
very
know,
good question. Yeah.
yeah. So, like, technically, it's an 24/7 exhibition of
Yeah.
your art.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, like, is it being seen by like everybody who's being invited and
Right.
and such?
Right.
So, had a question for you. So we talked about shipping costs, and there are also other costs involved in a typical gallery exhibition. So typically there are hanging fees. Like basically, if you're not hanging your piece yourself, according to the gallery guidelines, you would need to either like pay that fee to the gallery so that they hire somebody to hang your pieces for you, or they may offer just to do it for free. Some galleries do. Basically, they don't want anybody else to hang stuff on their walls because their walls just getting ripped out, with different screws. And so, what has been your experience with like hanging fees, like any kind of catering fees, like for the opening shows? Like do you have a list of things that you typically pay for?
Actually, that is an interesting question because honestly, I've never had to pay any types of fees where those are
Hmm.
concerned. But the thing that I pay very close attention to is the calls for art. They will very specifically tell you, you need to have this type of hanging hardware on the back of your piece. And
Exactly.
if you don't, they're either not going to hang it or it's going to cost you something. So I always make sure I have that
Uh-huh.
hanging hardware, which is usually really simple. It's usually, the way they want
Yeah.
it wired and things like that. But as far as everything else is concerned, I try and choose shows that have like the opening receptions covered and things like that. So I'm not really dealing with I think the shows that would be like BYOB or whatever they want to say.
And yeah.
I'm not really dealing with those. So I haven't had to pay anything like that as far as that's
Yeah.
concerned.
Yeah, I think smaller galleries, they have a very limited budget on just how much they can actually afford to spend on openings. And so it's been my experience that, they just can't afford to provide the full catering
Right.
for every opening night. And so they're asking the artist to pitch in, and that usually is spelled out in their agreement or like in their email communication saying, hey, all the artists that we're showing, like in this group art show, please, either pitch in this much or provide this and that. And I think that is pretty much the trend for the smaller galleries. For the bigger galleries, I
Yeah.
can see that now.
I think the artist co-op galleries, I think is where you run into that a lot
Yeah.
because they're run by artists.
Yeah.
And so they don't have the budget for those types of fees. A lot of
Hmm.
the shows that I enter are not in artist co-op galleries, only because I'm trying to enter shows now that are much more intentional and have
Hmm.
much wider kind of visibility rather than just
Yeah.
like the local stuff.
Yeah.
Although I think artist co-ops, I think they're wonderful galleries. I really do. I mean, they're just personal and they're wonderful galleries, but they do suffer from the funding issue because, it just is.
Yeah. And I think the artist co-op gallery, they're a great place to start.
Mhm.
Like if you've
They are.
never shown your art, if you just really want to start getting that on your CV, and on your website and kind of just getting the ball rolling so that you can get your next show. It is a great place to start. They're typically really easy to get in for like a group or even a solo show, as long as you just, have, decent art.
Yeah.
And you do need to like adhere to their guidelines about
Yeah.
like how you hang your art,
Yeah.
and then you pay those fees. I think it's well worth spending that money. And also, one thing that artists forget to do is take great photography.
Yeah.
You have to
Yeah.
have great photos because that's basically what you have to show for yourself after the show. Because if you do the show, you invite like, your circle of friends and family and like whoever else you think. And then most of the times you're hoping for a sale, but you don't really get the sales.
Right.
Like basically the only thing that you take away from this, so you incur the costs, you spend the time, you do the show. What you need to take away from the show is great photography.
Mm-hmm.
You have to pay to a photographer and have professional, photographs of your art, you standing there,
Yeah.
being all, creative and in your best attire and with best light, because that's what you're going to post in your website. That's what you're going to post next to each of those art pieces that you have featured on your website and on your social media. And that will propel you to your next thing. I always say, y- photographs, even a tripod is better than like somebody taking a photo of you,
Yeah.
yeah. So because you can control it a little bit more.
Yeah. I think also too, it's really worth the time to go and look at some of like YouTube has some really great tutorials for photographing art. And professional photographers have taken their time and they'll make these videos, these how-tos, and they'll do it. There's also some great written literature out there on doing it on websites like the Visual Artists Association has
Mhm.
wonderful help guides on how to take good photographs. Like with us, my husband actually took that time and learned how to do like, with proper lighting. And we're still novices at it. We really are. But I think the photographs we take now are just 100 times better than what we took at the very beginning because we didn't know
Yeah.
anything about lighting and shadows and this and that.
Yeah.
So the photographs he took at the Resilience Awards, that was the one that was in New York City just recently. They're
Yeah.
really good photographs. And
Yeah.
I kind of wish I wasn't wearing the jacket that I chose to wear that night. I kind of wish he had said a little frumpy, but he didn't say that. So I was like, "Oh, it's such a great jacket." And it's not. So that's okay. I kind of wish I had that on. But they were really good photographs. He took really, really
Yeah.
good ones. And you do need someone to take photographs of you interacting with
Yeah.
people because
Yeah.
like you said, the art world, your goal for exhibitions isn't to sell. You should never have that goal going into an exhibition because that's the quickest way to get disappointed and just
Yes.
depressed, right? Because the art world moves very slow. It's not,
Yeah.
it's different than any other industry in the world. The person you meet today may not buy a piece of art for you for 6 months, but then they'll
Yeah.
show up and they'll pay 10 grand for a painting. You don't know who's
Mhm.
gonna be showing up. You don't know who's going to want what. So the goal with the good photographs, like you said, it's exposure. And
Yeah.
that's gonna be the first thing that people see of your art is that photograph because that's the way the world is.
Mhm.
They see it online, they see it on Instagram, and if you don't have a good photograph and the other
Mhm.
key point is you've gotta have some good writing to go along with that photograph.
Yeah.
And collectors, they're not buying just art. They're buying the story behind the art. They want to know. And I'm actually struggling right now to get that connection because a lot of my pieces are so personal. It's very difficult for me to even explain what I do to people because people go, "What do you mean you listen to people? How does that help you with art?" It's very
Yeah.
difficult for people to put that connection together. So I'm figuring out how to get that message across. I'm going to be updating my website later on this afternoon with new descriptions with pieces and start putting those out on Instagram
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah.
Because you just have to have that connection. You got to be able to tell somebody, even if you just painted a
Mhm.
sunflower, you've got to
Yeah.
be able to tell somebody why. What was
Exactly.
it? What's the
Yeah.
connection there? And it's just really, really important. And what am I going to say? I like to paint boobs. That's not the connection that I want people to hear. That's not the one.
And the thing is, like, your art is not about that at all. It's
No.
about the emotion. Like
Yeah.
that's how I connect to your art. It's like you're really getting into this very intimate space of person's life, and it's a very brief moment, and you can see a thought on their face, and that thought is what captures me each time I look at your art. It's like, what is she thinking about? I can relate to her, and I'm trying to think, well, what do I think about when I have that face expression?
Yeah.
Or like, what conversation did I have with my husband recently that made me like feel that way?
Yeah.
And that's basically
And that's
how
what I
I
have to get
connect.
across to people. That's what I have
Yeah.
to say in this writing in a very brief, short little caption. You have to
Yeah.
express that. And it's difficult to do. It
Hmm.
takes some time and consideration and editing.
Yeah,
It takes
and
all that
because
stuff.
you don't want to impose
No.
your own perception of that piece because
No.
it's really wide open.
It is, and I want people
Yeah.
to put themselves in that intimate space because otherwise,
Hmm.
how do we have those conversations
Yeah.
that we really need to have?
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but I can't even turn on the news without just suddenly being, I can't watch this anymore.
I know.
It's a nightmare. But I want people to know that that intimacy, that space
Hmm.
that my figures are in, it also comes from those spaces too. It's
Yeah.
everything goes into those, and that's
Yeah.
difficult to write. It's very
Yeah.
difficult to get across.
Well, thank you so much. You guys check out Leigh's website.
Okay.
It's going to be here in the YouTube video and podcast video as well. I will put it in the description and also in our community. And so it's just really helpful. And I'll also post all the mentions of all the websites so you guys can go and check it all out. And so thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much.
Yeah,
Talk to you soon.
thank you. Bye.
Bye.